The Newsagents USA.
We need a president who will stand up for their right to bargain for better wages and working conditions. And Kamala will be that president. Yes, she can.
He's back for one night only. That was Barack Obama throwing his full star power behind Kamala Harris, the man who promised nearly 20 years ago hope and change, and the man who told everyone, yes, we can, is now passing on that mantra to Kamala Harris herself.
Yes, the mood here in Chicago is insane. Optimism, hope abounding, pumped energy that is beyond belief. And after the chaos of the past few weeks, with the question of whether Joe Biden would pull out of the race or not, and what would then follow, the surprise headline in Chicago is Democrats in array shock. But what about the rest of the country? Is that feel-good factor spreading out from Chicago? Welcome to the Newsagents USA.
It's Emily.
And it's John in Chicago. And the United Center has been humming as if it was one of the greatest nights in the Chicago Bulls history, who are the basketball team who play there, because the place is absolutely packed. We get floor passes, which allow us to stand on the floor where Michelle Obama and Barack Obama are speaking, and you cannot move. There are so many people packed in, and the levels of excitement and the people whooping and cheering and crying and shouting and screaming is like nothing I've ever seen in any political meeting, because it's just such a feeling of relief, that Joe Biden's got out of the way, but also this unalloyed joy that they now think maybe we can win the election in November, which they didn't think 4 weeks ago.
And I guess into this then walks this ultimate star power, the 44th president of the United States, speaking, 20 years after his first ever convention speech for the Democratic Party in 2004, and his wife, Michelle Obama, as a warm-up, i.e. the person that most Democrat-leaning Americans wanted to run for president. She always shunned it, said she never would, but they are the ultimate golden couple. And I guess they're also, in this context, the couple that have been there before. They're the couple who knows what Kamala Harris is going through when she's being race-baited by Trump. They're the couple that can say, honestly, we did this, 16 years ago. We got there. America has had a black president. We've done it. We can do it again. And I really think that between them, there was quite different messaging, wasn't there, in terms of the way Michelle Obama spoke, which was like, I would say it was quite fierce. It was quite angry. It was red meat. It was get up and do stuff. And Obama, who kind of fell back onto that presidential, warm, humorous, we're all part of the same family. Did you get that in the room?
Yeah, I did. And I thought that although I thought there was a marked change in the way of how to tackle Trump, because I think that, 4 years ago, it was all about the darkness of Donald Trump and the kind of terrible sort of dystopian future for America if Donald Trump became the president. I thought they were poking fun at him. There was an element of almost deriding him, laughing him. And you got that with Barack Obama. And he introduced this idea about Donald Trump and his obsession over crowd sizes. It's worth listening to. And then we'll pick up off the other end, because we need to explain something that Barack Obama did while he was saying this.
There's the childish nicknames, the crazy conspiracy theories, this weird obsession with crowd sizes.
He sort of puts his hands as if to say, when he's talked about size and Donald Trump, it was very small indeed.
This big.
Yeah.
And he might not be talking about crowd sizes. That's the point, right?
Exactly. I'm glad I was trying to subtly allude to the fact that it may not entirely be about that. You've made that clear.
I mean, what's funny is, and you're so right, Obama would not have done that 8 years ago. We saw Marco Rubio, who was on the stage in a sort of presidential debate for the Republican Party alongside Donald Trump, trying to make a slightly sort of seaside humour joke about the size of his hands, and it just backfired. He just looked like an idiot. He looked like somebody who didn't really know how to take on Donald Trump and was a bit too scared to do it properly. When Barack Obama did it last night, it was with the knowledge that he could make him look small just by talking about his obsession. I mean, that he didn't have to say any words at all. And I think we should also play a little bit of Barack Obama talking about the people that they need to reach. And I thought one of the lines where he referenced was the way some people, we don't all share the same feelings and we don't all talk the same language, but when your grandparents say something that's a bit cringe, you still love them, you still reach out to them, you still try and guide them through. And he kind of did this as if to say, he referenced Abraham Lincoln, the Better Angels speech, and said, we cannot lose voters by treating them like they're idiots if they support Trump. We have to reach across the aisle. Have a listen.
If a parent or grandparent occasionally says something that makes us cringe, we don't automatically assume they're bad people. We recognize that the world is moving fast, that they need time and maybe a little encouragement to catch up. Our fellow citizens deserve the same grace we hope they'll extend to us.
I thought that was a really important passage because I think where Barack Obama has been so interesting is that wasn't aimed at Republicans, that's aimed at Democrats. That was telling Democrats, stop being so bloody puritanical about everything, and that unless you follow our line on transgender issues, unless you follow our line on race or Middle East or whatever it happens to be, then you are a kind of bad person. People have kind of good views and they have some bad views, but don't disrespect people along the way and don't be absolutist, which is what he rails about. Barack Obama has gone on about social media being this sort of puritanical force, which is just hopeless. And it stokes culture wars, which alienates support. And I think Barack Obama was trying to say to the audience then, look, guys, you're progressives, great. I'm a progressive too, but people aren't perfect. And let's speak to them on their own terms without condemning. Bring them with you. And I thought that was really important. Emily, you used the word ferocity a moment ago. And I just wanted to play this clip of Michelle Obama, again talking about Donald Trump. Instead of laughing, though, there is a moral ferocity to what she says.
We know what comes next. We know folks are going to do everything they can to distort her truth. My husband and I sadly know a little something about this. For years, Donald Trump did everything in his power to try to make people fear us. See, his limited, narrow view of the world made him feel threatened by the existence of two hardworking, highly educated, successful people who happen to be black. Who's going to tell him that the job he's currently seeking might just be one of those black jobs?
She nailed that. Because she's
absolutely
referencing him at the Association of Black Journalists talking about immigrants coming in and taking black jobs. And at the time, you raised an eyebrow. We raised it on the podcast where we said, what exactly is a black job? What is he talking about when he's trying to put the fear of God into Americans that immigrants are coming to take not just white jobs, but black jobs? It made no sense. And Michelle Obama has just turned that around. And I think there was something, she spoke like somebody comfortable in her skin last night who wasn't afraid to take on the bully. And you and I were both in the room 8 years ago when the most famous line, I think, of the whole Hillary Clinton convention was Michelle Obama saying, when they go low, we go high. And I remember you and I, we've discussed it since and we've said, oh, that didn't really work, did it? It's all very well being very gracious, but actually it didn't really work for the Democrats. You know, fundamentally, they lost the election, and fundamentally, they never really had the response to Trump. And this time, she kind of switched things round a bit, and she made it a call to arms, and she kept repeating this phrase, like, don't get wound up, don't get annoyed, don't get pissed, just do something. That was her rallying cry. In other words, turn all your frustration into volunteering, knocking on doors, licking envelopes, answering the phone, stuff that you can do proactively that helps put Kamala Harris in power. Don't just sit there and whinge, because that, she said, is kind of what Donald Trump does.
It's up to us to remember what Kamala's mother told her. Don't just sit around and complain. Do something. So if they lie about her, and they will, we've got to do something. If we see a bad poll, and we will, we got to put down that phone and do something. If we start feeling tired, if we start feeling that dread creeping back in, we got to pick ourselves up, throw water on our face, and what? We only have 2.5 months, y'all, to get this done.
Where there was message discipline from both Barack and Michelle Obama was telling this audience, telling the Democrats who were gathered there with all that enthusiasm in their heart, this is going to be a tight race. It's going to come down to a few thousand votes in key swing states. Everybody has got to be putting their shoulder to the wheel as much as possible to get every single vote out. And I think that this is another area where Donald Trump is exposed, and that is on this question of race. You know, when she was saying one of those black jobs, Simone Biles, when she won one of the gold medals at the Olympic Games, the gymnast, all 4'8" of her, said, I really love my black job.
Black job. Yeah.
And I just thought that was so clever. And it's catching hold now. And you realise this has become almost a meme that Donald Trump has created to be used against him. He was great at creating memes that worked for him. He's now giving the ammunition that these people want to turn their fire on him. And I'll tell you something else. Donald Trump gave an interview a day or so ago where, look, Donald Trump in his whole history has been absolutely vile about Barack Obama, the conspiracy theory about birtherism. He then, when he became president, sought to undo everything that he could possibly undo. Any plaque that had the name Barack Obama on it, he wanted to get a metaphorical screwdriver out and take it off the wall. Yet he gave an interview where he's talking about how much he likes Barack and Michelle Obama. What is behind that?
I like him. I think he's a nice gentleman, but he was very, very weak on trade. If you take a look at what happened to our country trade-wise, it was a disaster. Take a look at Japan, take a look at China, take a look at what happened with some of these countries, what they did. But I happen to like him. I respect him and I respect his wife.
Yeah, right. I think what is going on there is that Donald Trump has been criticised after that appearance at the Black Journalists kind of conference, where he said, Kamala Harris has suddenly adopted being black, and he was accused of being racist. So what he's trying to do now is he says, I've never had a problem. It's not that I'm racist. I mean, look at me. I like Michelle.
Lots of my friends. Lots of my friends
are black. Michelle, Barack, I love them. Yeah. It's just that Kamala I can't stand. I think it's so transparent.
But also it's him trying to sort of reassure the staffers around him who are pulling their hair out collectively right now. Every time he goes off message and starts this race baiting, every time he starts trying to have a go at her and her origins, he even said in the rally on Monday, I'm better looking than she is. I mean, it sounds insane. It sounds slightly hysterical. Maybe he was making a joke, but it's all about his staffers kind of saying, what are you doing? Go out there and just talk about manufacturing, or talk about the economy, or talk about trade, talk about the stuff that you actually know about, that you can make a point about. Just don't get led down the path on race. And so he's sort of halfway there and then pulling back. You can see the sort of struggle of a man who sort of knows he ought to stay on message, but can't quite. And just to go back to the Michelle line one more time, I think what is at the bottom of this get out there sort of stuff, do something, is that they feel now that a win is possible, but they need a secure win. In other words, they do not want this to be a 2000 election where it ends up in the courts. And after the courts, it ends up in the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, the sort of Republican-backed, Bush-backed Supreme Court of 2000, then ends up handing it to Bush. They're saying, we don't just want to win this. We want there to be such a clear margin between the two candidates that they are not even going to start to bring lawyers into this, to have the whole January the 6th question again. And I think that is where you see the urgency of what some of them are saying in the messaging. It's not enough to win it. It's got to be won decisively to stop all the shenanigans.
Well, when we come back, let's talk about the role that women are going to play in this particular campaign, and reproductive rights and a woman's right to choose, and also some key ballots that open up states that would have hitherto been safe Republican, but that the Democrats are now eyeing.
The Newsagents USA. The Newsagents USA.
There is a subtle, maybe not so subtle, underpinning of this whole convention, and that is that it's been about the women. It has been about mothers. It's been about Kamala's mother. It's been about Michelle Obama's mother, Barack Obama's mother-in-law and his grandmother. It's been about Doug Emhoff's kids and how Kamala has been a stepmother to them. It's been Hillary Clinton talking about the glass ceiling, and it's been about Tammy Duckworth, that veteran who conceived her kids by IVF and said no military wound had been more painful to her than her own fertility. And I think if you tie in all these mentions of mothers, of kids, of women, you suddenly understand what is underpinning one of the key themes of the Democrats' convention, which is not just that they are on the verge of electing the first female president of the United States, which they now believe they can, but that the overturning of Roe v. Wade under Trump's administration through the Supreme Court was so fundamentally against the rights of American women. They want to remind them at every turn that they are the party for the women and the Republicans are the party against the women. 1 in 3 American women now live under an abortion ban. I mean, get your head around that and you understand why you are constantly going to hear this reference to the 53%, the larger majority in the US, the female vote.
I can't overstate this enough. I think it's 100% spot on what you've just said. And also, it helps the Democrats in so many different ways in crude political terms. For a start, you've got Donald Trump, who's got a long history of making disobliging remarks about women. You mentioned one, I'm better looking than Kamala is. The quotes from him when he talks about women are just so long. And then
let's go further than disobliging and let's say sexual
sexist,
abuse.
Right. And misogynistic. And then you've got J.D. Vance, who's got these really odd views about family. And that maybe odd is a charitable description as well. Yeah. When he talked about childless cat ladies. And against that, every time since the overturning of Roe versus Wade, that the issue of reproductive rights or a woman's right to choose is on the ballot, as it has been in rock-solid Republican Kansas, as it has been in Ohio, as it has been in Kentucky. Women have turned out to vote, and they have voted for a woman's right to choose. They do not want the overturning of Roe versus Wade. And so come November in the election, there are propositions that are going to be on the ballot paper, because the ballot paper is not just about who's the president. It's about who you want as your congressman, who you want as your senator, who you want as your town council, all that. That there is going to be a vote on abortion rights in North Carolina, in Arizona, and critically in Florida, which has become a safe Republican state. Yeah. And now the Democrats are starting to eye bits of the map where they could win that had hitherto seemed impossible. And that is because of this issue and Donald Trump's stance on it and J.D. Vance's stance on it. And I think the Democrats believe they can capitalize here. And one other just little factoid, women go out to vote in higher numbers than men.
Yeah. I mean, I think we should play you from Monday night a little bit of Hillary Clinton's speech, because Honestly, she brought the house down. And this was a woman who wasn't successful. Ultimately, she won the nomination, but when she was at her own convention, there was a lot of unrest about whether Bernie Sanders had been sort of pushed back. A lot of his supporters thought that he should have had a better chance than he was given by the party itself. And yet, on Monday night, she probably got the best reception she's ever had. And she talked about the glass ceiling, and she talked about the fact that, she hadn't done it, but she was supporting Kamala, who still could.
We've put a lot of cracks in the highest, hardest glass ceiling. And tonight, so close to breaking through once and for all. And you know what? On the other side of that glass ceiling is Kamala Harris raising her hand and taking the oath of office as our 47th President of the United States.
I mean, there was also a bit where she references Donald Trump as a convicted felon, and almost on cue, like a sort of Rocky Horror Picture Show, audience participation, they start chanting, "Lock him up. Lock him up," which was the chant that his supporters always shouted to her. The difference being, of course, that she had not been convicted through the courts by her peers in a jury. He now has. There was something I still would say slightly unsettling, actually, about hearing that kind of visceral chant on the floor, but it was a response to what she had had to go through from his fans who were, kind of out to get her.
Yeah, they were baying for blood. I honestly thought that was the best speech I've heard Hillary Clinton give. The funny thing is, I think she was so weighed down by the expectation and by message discipline and, what did the polling say she could say and what did the polling say she couldn't say, that she just felt sort of slightly strangled and, devoid of any humanity when she was campaigning in 2016. I thought she was absolutely extraordinary the other night at the
They're all
at
a bit
DNC.
freer, aren't they? They're all sounding, even though it's, organised within an inch of its little life, they are all actually sounding rhetorically freer, right?
And the other person who I think, who started life as this exotic kind of pain in the arse for the Democratic Party, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and you're thinking, Christ, who is this bloody firebrand who's going to make life hell for us? She also delivered the most brilliant, electrifying speech. And again, it is the women playing this central role in the Democratic Party. And you could ask, who are the women that are playing that role in the Republican Party? But it's worth listening to a bit of AOC, because I honestly think, watch this space. She has got one hell of a future.
I see a leader who understands. I see a leader with a real commitment to a better future for working families. And Chicago, we have to help her win. Because we know that Donald Trump would sell this country for $1 if it meant lining his own pockets and greasing the palms of his Wall Street friends. And I, for one, am tired of hearing about how a two-bit union buster thinks of himself as more of a patriot than the woman who fights every single day to lift working people out from under the boots of greed, trampling on our way of life.
There's one thing I would pick up on. I would say that compared to, say, the Labour Party conference, this is further to the left. We've had Joe Biden on stage talking about how I'm the most pro-union president there's been. It's about working rights and the downtrodden and really allying themselves with what in American terms they would say the middle classes, but we would say kind of working classes, I think. And it's unashamed and it's very self-confident. If Kamala Harris does win in November, I think it's going to be the most left-wing, in American terms, president that we have seen in decades.
I mean, the funny thing is that, of course, Joe Biden was picked because he seemed to be the safest centrist pair of hands to bring, unconvinced Democrats across the aisle. But if you look at his record in government, what he's actually done with the Inflation Reduction Act, with the Jobs Act, with the payout for COVID, what he's done in terms of injecting huge amounts of money in the economy, still with a slightly protectionist vibe, but creating, 18 million new jobs, and green technologies and all the rest of it. Of course, he has pulled his party actually away from, I think, the direction many thought he would go in, which was sort of centre or centre-right, and actually towards Ocasio-Cortez and others. Bernie Sanders was on the stage last night and doesn't have a bad word to say. The person I do want to talk about a little bit, though, is Doug Emhoff, because he is Kamala Harris's husband. He is the first ever second gentleman. In other words, the first, male spouse to female VP. But I suddenly realised until last night I'd never actually heard him speak. And he did the introduction to Kamala because I guess, he knows her better than anyone. And their 10th wedding anniversary is on Thursday when she makes her own big speech accepting the nomination. And last night we heard how they met. And there was something very kind of geeky, folksy about him spelling out the phone message that he'd left her and how she replays it to him on their anniversary because it's so bad.
Now, for generations, people have debated when to call the person you're being set up with. And never in history has anyone suggested 8:30 a.m. And yet, that's when I dialed. I got Kamala's voicemail and I just started rambling. Hey, it's Doug.
So he's laughing at himself, which I think is critical. One of the things you never, ever hear Trump do is laugh at himself. What have you got with both Emhoff, with Tim Walz? You've got this ability to laugh at themselves. But he then goes on to talk about his kids and her, the blended family. And you referenced J.D. Vance. Emhoff didn't spell it out by name. But clearly there was a sense of, the cat lady craziness in what he was saying. He sort of took it on. He said there was a maturity to speaking about blended families. He said, this is how most families are. Divorce isn't a good thing, but it's a common thing. Let's not pretend people don't break up. Let's not pretend people don't have stepkids and wider families. This is not a family off a breakfast cereal packet. It is messy and complicated, but still loving and patriotic and committed. And then there was a bit where he admitted, I never knew this, that his own kids do actually call her Mamala. Oh my God, I thought that was a Drew Barrymore thing. They do actually call her Mamala. Maybe we just, we're too British for that kind of stuff. But his role was very clear there to show the personal side of Kamala, the female side of Kamala, and to show how central she is to his own blended family. It was a kind of two fingers up to Vance, wasn't it?
So, you know how on this podcast we like to pull the curtain back a little bit. A very well-connected friend of mine, just days after Biden pulled out of the race, hosted a fundraiser for Kamala Harris, where she came to a relatively small dinner with Doug Emhoff, and apparently told the story of what happened when she heard that Biden was pulling out of the race. She was in Washington. Doug Emhoff was in the West Coast. And so she rang him immediately. He was at SoulCycle. And she said to him, you've got to get back immediately. I think Harris only had a few hours additional notice. And apparently there was some huge air traffic control screw up, which meant that there were no flights going from the West Coast to the East Coast. And what this friend of mine was saying is, he said, look, their relationship is so tight and there is such a sort of mutual dependence on each other. There's, with Donald Trump and Melania, the number of times I saw her push his hand away when he tried to hold her hand, or I remember following them off stage when they did this speech at the White House for the Republican convention because there was no normal convention. And the moment they thought they were out of camera shot, she just quickly, as fast as she can, gets away from him. And Melania Trump you hardly ever see on the road. I mean, you saw her very briefly at the Republican convention. But I think that the sort of relationship between Kamala Harris and Doug Emhoff is absolutely for real.
It's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, obviously we sound like we've kind of drunk the happy juice because I think that is the sense you get from that convention right now. I mean, I think this is, this is part of the problem, isn't it? That you are just surrounded by all this kind of joy and potential and, the talk of change. And I guess the question that we asked at the very beginning of the podcast is it spreading? Is it being felt more widely? Are any, normal, whatever that means, Americans tuning in and saying, oh, I didn't think I'd vote for Kamala, but I might now. And I guess that's why you hear so much of this personal introduction, because that's the stuff that people will repeat to their friends. They won't take policy out. They won't take, they're not going to start talking about jobs numbers, particularly, down the bar, but they might tell the story of how Doug Emhoff left a terrible voicemail for, his wife-to-be when they first met, because that is the kind of thing that they think other people can relate to. It's about whether your daughter or whether your son finally starts talking to your partner as if, they were part of the family, because that's something that people can relate to. And I guess that's why there is so much emphasis, on stuff that might sound to the British ear slightly schmaltzy and slightly kind of cutesy, because that's the stuff that they reckon will actually start to move, not just the vibes, but the numbers.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think, and it's right to kind of ask ourselves, have we drunk the Kool-Aid? Are we now kind of, just happy, clappy supporters? Yeah. No, I think there are still real challenges. I thought we would have heard more about policy, about what they were going to do, about detail at this convention than we have heard. I still think that if Donald Trump can, and it's a big if he can focus on the economy, on the border, America's place in the world, then I think that, this race is far from over. At the moment, Donald Trump is tripping up a lot. But if he stops and if he focuses and finds a line of attack that actually resonates, then, the Democrats have still got some big questions to answer. I think the economic plan that has been sketched so far is fine as far as it goes, but there's some important detail that is left out. Will Americans vote for further tax cuts, which is what Donald Trump is promising? So I think there's it's a sprint, but it's a long 10 weeks to go.
What I would say is I think Donald Trump's rhetoric has weirdly given the Democrats permission to actually do something different. And by that I mean that when it was Hillary Clinton, we all remember that she was so policy heavy. It was like she worked for the sort of NPR, broadcasting station. Here are my numbers. Here is my policy. Read my website.org. And Trump didn't do any of that. He just made people feel good when they got to his rally. We've seen it. We've been there. People love being there. They make friends in the queue. They bring their deck chair. They, it's like a sort of, a tailgate after a football game, before a football game. And I think in a funny way, the Democrats have learned that from Trump. They've learned that you don't have to spell everything out in minute detail with a ledger and an Excel spreadsheet. You can just kind of make people feel like they want to be a part of something. And that might be the best thing that he's taught them actually in this 8 years.
We'll be back after the break.
The Newsagents USA. The Newsagents USA.
From exciting Chicago. The delegates at the Democratic National Convention, well, they just completed their roll call. And they have nominated Coach Walz and me to be the next Vice President and President of the United States of America.
So with this perfect moment of timing, Kamala Harris is nowhere near Chicago at this point. She is in the Fiserv Center in Milwaukee, the swing state of Wisconsin, where Trump just last month had his own Republican convention. I was there. I remember the size of the room, and she was talking to a packed crowd as she was played out to Beyonce, just at the moment where the convention had, as they say, put her over the top. In other words, all the delegates had added up to the right number to make her the nominee for president. And I do think something that maybe we haven't sort of articulated is very strong is that Kamala Harris is on the ticket with Walz and also Biden. In a way, there are three of them. I mean, without getting into a sort of Lady Diana line, there are three of them on this ticket. There's Biden's achievements, or failings, if they want to look at it like that, whatever he's done. There's Walz, who's the newcomer, who people are just getting to understand. And there's Harris, the prosecutor, the VP, who links from the old and the new, and, the pioneer, the woman who might now be the first ever female president of the United States. And so, in a weird way, the fact that Biden is still there in the shadows means that there is this triumvirate, I think, on the ticket now, which in a way is stronger.
Well, I felt there was a sort of bleeding away of Biden's power after Monday night. You could feel it. You could feel that he was no longer quite that central figure in this whole race. And I think
maybe we'll call him the Holy Ghost. How about that?
Yeah, but I think that might be more accurate. And I think that actually the magic, or whatever you want to call it, that Kamala Harris is trying to pull off, whether she can do it or not, is she is going to have been the incumbent vice president for 3.5 years and stand in November as the change candidate. How do you pull that off? And she's doing it by saying, I am of a different generation. Very, very important piece of messaging, given it was going to be between a 78 and an 81-year-old. And I think she is somehow positioning herself as someone who is representing something new. It would have been impossible for Joe Biden to have run as the change candidate, having been president. And Donald Trump was the change candidate in 2016 when he said, I want to kind of run a million miles from what Barack Obama has done the previous 8 years. But Kamala Harris is trying to simultaneously pull off this idea that, I'm proud of the achievements of the last 3.5 years, but I am the change candidate as well.
I think
that is
so
her
right.
sell.
And I think the novelty value should not be underestimated, actually, because Trump, I think it was Obama who used this word, stale. And I really I was sort of slightly shocked. I mean, I was running up a very steep mountain at the time and I was like, oh, God. That was a weird moment because I was like, Trump used to be, he used to be the future once, as they said. He has now stood for this same race 3 times. They've heard it. We have heard it all before. We know the lines. We know what he says. We know how he sounds. She is now bringing something that feels like novelty value. And I don't mean to be reductive by saying that, but it does make people turn up. Right? Turn up the volume for the first time, because I think there are loads of people in America who still don't know what she really is, who don't know what she sounds like, really, who don't know Tim Walz at all. And for them, there will be a kind of, we know this guy, we've heard that guy, what else is there? And, it may end up coming down to that.
Look, a month ago, all bets were off. It was going to be a Trump landslide. No one thinks that right now. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
The Newsagents USA.